Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
That's fine, I said, my voice calm but sharp, carrying through the hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware. I barely looked up as I pulled my phone from my bag, my fingers moving with steady precision. I'll just cancel the renovations I paid for. The room fell into a hush, the easy chatter of cousins catching up and aunts reminiscing over old memories dying out like a candle snuffed by an unseen force. My father's fork clattered against his plate, the metal ringing against ceramic, and for the first time in my life, I saw something unfamiliar on his face, genuine shock. The family reunion had started out as it always did, with warm greetings, awkward side hugs, and the same recycled stories that had been told 1,000 times over. It was held in the backyard of my parents' house, the house I had spent the last year pouring thousands of dollars into, making it livable again after decades of neglect. The smell of barbecue mixed with the sharp tang of freshly mowed grass, and kids ran through the yard, shrieking as they weaved between lawn chairs and coolers stocked with beer and soda. I had been balancing a plate of ribs in my lap, listening to my uncle drone on about his fishing trip, when my father had chosen the moment to drop the bombshell in the most casual tone imaginable. "Well, it only makes sense," he had said, waving his hand like the decision had already been made long before this moment. "Michael's got the kids to think about, and he needs the space. You don't have a family to provide for, so obviously the house should go to him." Just like that. Just an offhand comment, like he was stating something as natural as the sun rising in the morning. My mother had nodded in agreement, as though this was the most logical, expected thing in the world. My brother, sitting comfortably across from me with his wife and 2 kids, had the audacity to look smug, barely glancing up from his plate as if my reaction was irrelevant. I had felt the weight of every set of eyes on me, waiting, expecting. Expecting what, exactly? That I'd smile and nod, like I had for years? That I'd say something gracious, maybe offer my congratulations to Michael like I was some sort of extra in my own life? Instead, I had simply reached for my phone, my fingers flying across the screen as I pulled up the contract I had signed with the contractor last month. That's when my father's face had changed. The color drained from his cheeks as he sat up straighter, suddenly realizing that something wasn't right. My mother shifted beside him, setting down her glass of iced tea a little too hard, her lips pressing together into a tight line. What are you talking about?" My father's voice, usually so certain, wavered just enough to make me press my lips together in satisfaction. I glanced up briefly, catching Michael's confused frown. He still wasn't getting it. "The renovations," I said smoothly, keeping my expression neutral, but my voice carried just enough weight to make my father flinch. "The ones I've been paying for. You know, the new roof, the plumbing, the electrical work." I made a vague gesture with my free hand before returning my attention to my phone. "Pretty much everything that actually makes this house worth anything." I heard my mother suck in a breath, and a few whispers broke out along the table. Someone coughed. A beer can hissed open. My father was staring at me now, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and the first flickers of panic. "Now, hold on, Sarah," he said, his voice a poor attempt at his usual authoritative tone. "You didn't pay for—" I cut him off with a slight shake of my head, lifting my gaze to meet his fully now. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to understand, even if it took a second longer than it should have. "Yes, I did," I said, my voice carrying just enough finality to make him hesitate. "Every invoice. Every check. Every single improvement that kept that place from collapsing on itself." I let the words settle for a moment before adding, almost lazily, "I suppose it's lucky Michael's getting it, though, since he'll be the one figuring out how to pay for whatever's left." Michael, who had barely been paying attention, suddenly sat forward, his brow furrowing. "Wait, what?" I ignored him. I was watching my father. The last traces of color had drained from his face, his hands tightening into fists against the tablecloth. I could see it now, the moment he was piecing it all together, the realization that he had just publicly handed over something he no longer had control over. Silence stretched unbearably. "Sarah," my mother started, her voice strained, but I held up a hand. "No, really, it's fine," I said, standing slowly and brushing off my jeans. "If Michael's getting the house, then he can handle it. I mean, it wouldn't be fair otherwise, right?" Michael finally looked uneasy. "What do you mean, handle it?" I smiled, just slightly. "The bills. The debts. The fact that the house isn't technically paid off because I've been covering every major expense for the last 3 years." A murmur rippled through the gathered family members, and I caught my uncle shooting my father a sideways look. My aunt was whispering something to my mother, whose face had gone rigid. Michael, however, still looked baffled. "Wait, what?" I tucked my phone back into my bag, exhaling softly. "You'll figure it out," I said, offering one last, pleasant nod before turning to leave. As I walked away, I heard my father mutter my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't need to. The panic in his voice told me everything I needed to know. I sat in my car outside my apartment for what felt like an eternity, my fingers tapping against the steering wheel as my father's words echoed in my head, looping over and over like a broken record I couldn't shut off. It wasn't just the decision itself that had left a bitter taste in my mouth, but the way they had done it, the sheer audacity of acting like it was some inevitable conclusion that I should have simply accepted without question. They had sat there, in my presence, and handed over the house I had poured thousands of dollars into, as if my investment, my work, my sacrifices, had been nothing more than an afterthought to be dismissed with a wave of my father's hand. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years, a simmering determination that hardened into something unshakable as I sat down at my desk with my laptop, a cup of black coffee, and a burning need to understand exactly what had been going on behind my back. If they thought I would just accept their decision and move on, they had severely underestimated me. I had learned a long time ago that when people show you exactly what you mean to them, you believe them the first time. And right now, my father had made it clear I was worth less than Michael's convenience. The first thing I did was check the property tax records, something I had never thought to do before because, foolishly, I had trusted my parents to handle their own affairs. But as I sifted through public records, my stomach twisted with the kind of dread that settles deep into your bones, the kind that tells you something is horribly, irreversibly wrong. My name was listed on every single tax payment for the last 5 years, meaning that at some point, either knowingly or through some convoluted scheme, I had been footing the bill for a house they had just handed to my brother without a second thought. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, forcing my fingers to unclench from around my coffee mug before I shattered it against the desk. This wasn't just a simple case of favoritism or neglect. This was deliberate, calculated, and bordering on fraudulent. They had let me pay for their home, let me believe I was investing in something that would one day be mine, only to rip it away the moment it was convenient for them. I could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface, but instead of letting it consume me, I let it sharpen my focus. If they thought they could pull this off without consequences, they were about to learn a very painful lesson. I started digging deeper, pulling up financial records, old emails, and receipts that I had saved over the years, and that was when I found something even worse. My father had taken out a loan against the house, using my credit. I stared at the document in stunned silence, my pulse roaring in my ears, my hands gripping the edges of the paper so tightly they crumpled beneath my fingers. He had forged my name, taken out a substantial amount of money, and had never once mentioned it, never once made a single payment toward it. I closed my laptop, pressing my hands against my temples as I forced myself to breathe through the rage clawing at my throat. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This wasn't just about Michael getting what he wanted at my expense. This was theft, plain and simple, and my father had expected me to remain blissfully ignorant, to continue covering their expenses without ever realizing how deeply they had betrayed me. For a long time, I just sat there, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force, making it hard to think, hard to breathe, hard to comprehend how they could do this to their own daughter. But then, something inside me hardened, something cold and ruthless and unyielding, something that whispered, "You're not going to let them get away with this." I reached for my phone with steady hands, my heart no longer pounding with anger, but with a chilling certainty that settled deep into my bones. I scrolled through my contacts, found the name I was looking for, and pressed call. When the receptionist answered, her voice bright and professional, I didn't hesitate. "Hi, this is Sarah Lawson," I said, my voice calm, controlled, and carrying just the faintest edge of steel. "I need to schedule a consultation with a real estate attorney. I believe my parents may have committed fraud, and I'd like to discuss legal ownership of a property they've claimed isn't mine." As I hung up the phone, I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile creeping onto my face as the weight that had been crushing me finally started to lift. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. I sat at my kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee in front of me, my laptop open, and a folder filled with every incriminating piece of financial evidence I had gathered over the past week. The weight of my parents' betrayal still clung to me like a second skin, but I had decided that if they wanted to play dirty, I would not be the fool who kept playing fair. I wasn't the type to throw a tantrum, to scream and demand justice in the middle of a family gathering, but what I was good at was playing the long game, watching as the people who wronged me unraveled under the weight of their own choices. They had built this house of lies, and now, brick by brick, I was going to tear it down. I started small, just little comments slipped into casual conversations, small enough to be dismissed as nothing more than observations, but sharp enough to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of my extended family. At first, it was a quiet remark to my Aunt Linda over coffee, a casual mention that I had been so relieved to stop covering the property taxes now that Michael was the owner of the house. She had raised an eyebrow at that, stirring her tea a little too slowly, the words turning over in her mind as she processed them. I knew she wouldn't let it go, not with the way she loved to gossip, and within hours, I was certain half my family would be whispering about it. Then there was the comment I made to my cousin Rachel when she asked me if I was still helping my parents with bills. I had simply smiled, shook my head, and said, "Oh no, Michael has everything covered now." I guess that's the benefit of being the chosen one. The way her mouth had parted slightly, the flicker of confusion in her eyes, told me everything I needed to know. I didn't need to scream from the rooftops about the betrayal, because I knew people would put the pieces together themselves if I gave them just enough information to question things. My father had always counted on keeping control of the narrative, keeping everyone in line with the same rehearsed story, but now, those carefully curated lies were starting to fracture. It didn't take long for the first cracks to show. The first sign that my plan was working came 3 days later when my mother called me, her voice just a little too tight, her words just a little too carefully measured. "Sarah, honey, I heard something strange from your aunt the other day," she said, trying to sound casual, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. "She said you mentioned something about the property taxes? You know your father, and I always took care of that, right?" I had smiled to myself, leaning back against my couch as I let a short silence hang between us, just long enough for the discomfort to settle in on her end. "Oh, I must have misunderstood then," I said, my voice dripping with innocence, though we both knew I was lying. "I just assumed since I was the one making the payments, I was the one responsible for them. But if you and Dad had it covered, then I guess I must have been mistaken." Another pause. A sharp inhale. The way she hesitated before responding told me everything I needed to know. "Well, I mean, you did help out here and there, sweetheart," she finally said, her tone suddenly softer, like she was trying to coax me into dropping it. "You know we appreciated everything you did." I let out a light laugh, something just on the edge of bitter. "Right," I said, keeping my tone neutral, but I knew she could hear the edge beneath it. "I guess Michael appreciates it too, now that the house is his." I could almost feel the tension through the phone, the way she was scrambling to find a way to smooth things over, to keep me from digging any deeper. But I was already miles ahead of her, and I had no intention of stopping now. It didn't take long for my mother to start seeing cracks in the foundation of her own lies. Over the next few days, I made sure to distance myself, withdrawing the financial support I had been providing for them over the years, letting them feel the full weight of their choices without my safety net to fall back on. My father tried calling once, his voice clipped and impatient, asking if I had forgotten to send over the money for the utilities that month. I simply told him that since I was no longer part of the household, It wasn't really my responsibility anymore, was it? The silence that followed had been delicious. The panic set in faster than I expected, my parents realizing that Michael had neither the financial stability nor the responsibility to take on the burdens I had quietly shouldered for years. Bills started piling up, unexpected expenses creeping in, and suddenly, Michael wasn't looking quite so comfortable in his new role as the head of the family home. Then, one night, just as I was settling in with a glass of wine and the satisfaction of knowing that my plan was working, my phone rang, and I smirked when I saw the name flashing across the screen. Michael. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice light and casual. Hello? What the hell are you doing? His voice was sharp, laced with frustration and barely contained anger. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch just a little longer than necessary. Then, with the sweetest smile he couldn't see, I said, "Whatever do you mean, Michael?" The sound of his heavy exhale, the way he barely held back the curses bubbling to his lips, told me everything I needed to know. The seeds of doubt had not only been planted, but were already starting to grow into something that would tear their carefully constructed world apart. I sat across from my lawyer in his neatly organized office, my fingers resting lightly on the stack of paperwork that would legally undo everything my parents and Michael had schemed to take from me. The polished wooden desk between us felt like a chessboard, and every move I had made over the last few weeks had led me here, to this moment, where I would make the final play that would send their entire plan crashing down around them. I had been patient, methodical, and ruthless in my approach, watching as their carefully built web of lies unraveled one thread at a time, but now it was time to end it completely. My lawyer, an older man with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, slid the last document toward me, his voice calm but firm as he said the words I had been waiting to hear. "Once you sign this, the house is legally yours again, and there's nothing they can do to fight it." I let out a slow breath, my pen hovering for just a second before I pressed it to the paper, signing my name with steady, unshaking strokes. A sense of satisfaction settled deep in my chest as I set the pen down, the weight of betrayal finally lifting as I reclaimed what had always rightfully been mine. My father had tried to outmaneuver me, had assumed I would do what I had always done, accept their decisions without a fight, sacrifice my own stability for the sake of family harmony, but he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated just how much I had learned from watching him over the years. By the time the legal transfer was finalized, I already had my next move planned, and it started with an invitation. I made sure to choose my words carefully, wording the message in a way that seemed completely harmless, just a casual family gathering to discuss some important updates regarding the house. My mother was the first to reply, a hesitant of course, "Will be there," that told me she already suspected something was wrong, but wasn't willing to say it outright. Michael took longer, his response coming in late at night with nothing more than a reluctant fine. I could almost hear the resentment in that single word, but I didn't care. The tension in the air was thick when they arrived at my apartment, the atmosphere charged with unspoken frustration and growing unease. My father sat stiffly in one of my chairs, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping against his knee in an impatient rhythm, while my mother twisted the strap of her purse between her hands, her nervous energy almost vibrating off of her. Michael leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his expression a carefully constructed mask of indifference, but I could see the cracks forming at the edges. They had no idea what was coming, and for once, I was the one holding all the cards. I took my time, letting the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to settle before I finally placed the stack of legal documents on the coffee table in front of them. "I thought it would be best to do this face to face," I said, my voice even, controlled, almost too calm for what I was about to drop on them. "As of today, the house is legally mine again. I own it outright, and there's nothing you can do to change that." The reaction was immediate, the room erupting into overlapping voices, my father demanding to know how I had pulled this off, my mother gasping in shock, Michael letting out a bitter, disbelieving laugh as he shook his head in frustration. I let them flail, let them argue, let them try to process the fact that their little scheme had blown up in their faces, and when they finally quieted down, I leaned forward, meeting my father's eyes with the kind of cold certainty that left no room for negotiation. You took out a loan in my name without telling me. You used my money to pay for things while lying to my face about it. Did you really think that wasn't going to come back to bite you? My father's face darkened, but before he could spit out some weak excuse, Michael's voice cut through the tension, unexpectedly sharp, unexpectedly raw. You don't understand, he snapped, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I needed that house. I have a family to take care of. You don't even have anyone else to think about. I stared at him, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across my face. So that's what this was about? You thought that because I don't have a husband or kids, I didn't deserve to keep what I worked for? I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. You manipulated them into giving you something you didn't earn because you felt entitled to it. And now, because of your selfishness, they're the ones paying the price. Michael's expression wavered, his confidence crumbling under the weight of his own guilt, but before he could respond, my mother's voice broke through, pleading, desperate. Sarah, please, she said, reaching for my hand, her eyes wide with panic. We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought it was the best thing for everyone. I pulled my hand away, standing slowly as I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. No, I said, my voice firm. You thought it was the best thing for Michael. You never once thought about me. The silence that followed was suffocating, thick with the weight of everything left unsaid, but I wasn't done yet. I picked up the last document from the pile and slid it across the table toward them, watching as my father hesitated before picking it up. His eyes scanned the page, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to pure, unfiltered panic. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, slow and deliberate, savoring the moment as I delivered the final blow. I sold the house. The color drained from his face, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. My mother let out a strangled gasp, covering her mouth with both hands, and Michael's face contorted into something between anger and devastation. I had taken away the very thing they had stolen from me, and now they had nothing left to hold over my head. I crossed my arms, tilting my head slightly as I watched them unravel. I hope it was worth it, I said, my voice quiet but razor-sharp. Because now you have nothing. I turned away before they could see the small, satisfied smile tugging at the corners of my lips, because for the first time in my life, I had won. Michael sat in the same chair he had occupied during our last conversation, but this time, he wasn't smirking, wasn't leaning back with that smug entitlement he had worn like a second skin for so many years. His hands were gripping the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned a ghostly shade of white, his jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a tooth if he didn't let go of whatever words he was choking back. I watched him in silence, waiting for him to speak first, waiting for him to acknowledge that the game was over and that, for once, he had lost. My parents were seated on the couch, my mother clutching a tissue she had barely used, though she kept pressing it dramatically to the corners of her eyes as though the mere motion of dabbing at non-existent tears would soften me. My father, on the other hand, sat stiffly beside her, his expression an unreadable mask of restrained fury, though I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching every time his gaze flicked toward the unopened envelope on the coffee table in front of him. None of them spoke at first, the weight of their failure pressing down on them as they finally grasped the reality of the situation they had so carelessly created for themselves. Michael was the first to crack, exhaling a slow, measured breath before dragging a hand down his face, his features twisting into something that resembled genuine devastation. I don't understand how you could do this, he muttered, his voice thick with something that sounded almost like betrayal, as if I was the one who had wronged him. You didn't have to sell the house. You could have just kept it. You could have. He stopped himself, shaking his head as though trying to make sense of the reality he was still struggling to accept. I leaned back in my chair, crossing one leg over the other, letting my fingers tap idly against the armrest as I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to sit in it, to feel it, to really let the consequences of his actions settle deep into his bones, because for once in his life, there was no safety net beneath him, no easy fix that would make everything go back to the way it was. You didn't think I would actually let you keep it, did you? I asked, tilting my head slightly, watching as my words made his entire body go rigid. After everything you did? After the way you and Dad lied to me, used me, stole from me? You really thought I'd just let it go? Michael swallowed hard, his throat working around whatever excuse he was trying to summon, but for once, he had nothing. My mother, however, was not ready to accept defeat. She sniffled softly, her voice gentle, almost pleading, the way it had always been whenever she wanted something from me without having to ask directly. "Sweetheart," she began, reaching for my hand as if physical contact might soften me, but I shifted slightly so she couldn't touch me, watching as her face fell just the tiniest bit before she forced out a fragile smile. "I know you're upset, and I know you feel betrayed, but we're still family. Families make mistakes, but they forgive each other. We can get past this, we should get past this." I stared at her for a long moment, my expression unreadable, my pulse steady, my anger no longer hot and blistering, but something colder, sharper, more precise. She thought this was about feelings, about some lingering emotional wound that could be healed with the right combination of words and forced sentiment, but she still didn't get it. This wasn't about being upset. This was about consequences. I reached down, picked up the envelope, and placed it gently in my father's lap, watching as his fingers curled around it automatically, though he made no move to open it. "What's this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral, but I could see the wariness in his eyes, the way his entire body had gone tense, bracing for something he wouldn't be able to control. I gave him a slow, measured smile, the kind that had no warmth behind it, no affection, no lingering traces of the daughter who had once blindly trusted him. "That," I said, leaning forward just slightly, "is a bill. An itemized breakdown of every single dollar I spent on that house. The property taxes, the renovations, the emergency repairs, the loan you took out in my name without my permission. Every cent is accounted for, and every cent is owed." I let the words settle, let the weight of them sink in before adding, "I expect full payment within the next 6 months. If I don't get it, I'll be taking legal action." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, my father's face draining of color just as it had the day he had first realized the mistake he had made in underestimating me. My mother let out a choked sound of disbelief, her hand flying to her chest as if I had physically struck her, while Michael just sat there, staring at the envelope like it was some kind of death sentence. I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket, my movements slow and deliberate, savoring the moment for exactly what it was, the conclusion to a game they had rigged from the start, only to find themselves on the losing end. "I hope it was worth it," I said, my voice calm, steady, entirely unaffected by the devastation they had brought upon themselves. "I hope every lie, every manipulation, every choice you made to cut me out and hand everything to Michael felt good in the moment. Because now you have nothing." I turned toward the door, my steps unhurried, my pulse steady, my heart unburdened by the weight I had carried for far too long. I was done. I was free. I had won. But as I stepped outside, the cold evening air biting at my skin, a single thought lingered at the back of my mind, quiet but persistent, an intrusive whisper that refused to be silenced. Was it worth it? I exhaled slowly, watching as my breath curled in the air like smoke before finally dissipating, vanishing into the night. Maybe, but at what cost?